We're going? Oh, cool, we're going. Okay, welcome back to the Movie Well Marathon. We're working our way through the Planet of the Apes. We've made it all the way to Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. I'm Andrew, that's Mac. We're a little behind, so I'm rushing. Um, yes, say hi real quick to make sure that I can hear you.
Hi.
Okay, cool, yeah,
This
we're
is
good.
Matt.
Yes, it is. Yeah, quick recap. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, directed by Matt Reeves. It came out in 2014. Holy shit, it's 10 years old. That feels wrong.
Gosh.
That hurts,
Well, I
honestly.
don't I don't know it from when it originally came out, but it is a fairly modern movie. I remember
Uh-huh.
it coming out and now
Yeah.
it's 10 years old.
Yes, it is. And quick recap. It's been 10 years since the ending of Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Caesar's got a big ape community. They're doing cool things. There's a small band of humans that are living in San Francisco. The pandemic of the simian flu wiped out most of the Earth. We're following
Mhm.
some ragtag team of humans while trying to restore power to their compound using a dam up in the forest in San Francisco. They bump into the apes. Conflict arises. All sorts of crazy things happen. You've seen the movie. What are your thoughts? We're gonna start
Hopefully
with
you've
you.
seen the movie.
You've seen it. We got lots of character arcs and fun things.
Yeah. This is kind of like I don't know. I was going to say back to the roots of the thing, but it's not really the roots of the thing because the roots are like when you have one of the outsiders, like you have one ape or you have one human and interacting with a bunch of others.
Mm,
So it's not really like it's not back to the roots of the franchise, but it feels very similar to the philosophy of the roots of the like original of the franchise because of the whole like how difficult it is to avoid violence,
mm,
essentially.
mm-hmm.
Um, and I thought it was pretty good. Um,
Right?
I liked a lot of it. I will say I felt like I could predict a fair amount of it, but that didn't necessarily make it bad.
I think that's fair.
It
Yeah.
yeah, like, I think it's sort of like at a certain point, like, chance encounters ape in the woods. Oh, no, someone shot the ape. That never happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Caesar thankfully made peace because
Yes.
that's what Caesar does.
Of
But I
course.
liked the moment where they, like, rode to the colony, like, in there like, every ape
Mm-hmm.
is there,
Mm-hmm.
and Caesar speaks, and the humans aren't used to that, and so he's like, "We don't want war. You stay where you are. We'll stay where we are, and it won't be a problem."
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the humans can't do that because then they're just gonna like die off, and they also have like they feel like they need to connect with the rest of the world. Which, if I were in their situation, same,
Mm-hmm.
same. And so I really liked like I think the best part of this movie were the interactions and the character like motivations of
Mm-hmm.
Malcolm and Caesar and how those
Absolutely.
interacted with each other. That
Yeah.
was a fantastic like this movie rotated around those two characters, I think. And I really liked it.
Yeah. I absolutely agree. I love it. I love their when they communicate. I love when Caesar's trying to like be all big and cool and dramatic. One of my favorite scenes in general, honestly, is when what's his name? Carter, whatever his name is, snuck
Trevor,
in
yeah.
Carter snuck in the extra gun and threatens Caesar's sons, and Caesar just wipes him out with one
Yeah.
arm. And he like
Uh-huh.
Malcolm and Caesar, are like yelling at each other. It's so cool because so much of it is like it's not just the character interactions. The acting in this is fantastic, and
Yeah.
Andy Serkis is doing it through mocap, but he's
What's
killing
funny
it.
is I think I can recognize him through mocap at
They
this
they
point. Like
changed it a
like
little
he
bit for
is
this one. You can see more of him in this for sure.
well, and maybe that's the case because I think Rise definitely was a little bit more. They tried to make him look more ape-like
Hmm.
than, and the rest of them they're trying to make him a little bit more human-like to show that evolution. I think,
Yeah.
but I think at this point, like I just know him from so many movies where
Uh
he's like
huh.
under heavy makeup, like I'm beginning to recognize the way that he emotes so that it can be communicated through whatever fake thing is put across his
No,
face.
I
The way
absolutely
he
agree.
uses his like the tilts of his head and like the way he squints his eyes
Yeah.
sometimes, and like he communicates extraordinary well. And what a unique set of skills to have.
Mm.
Like even just within the acting world, like the ability to be the person that can clearly communicate through either prosthetics or CGI or whatever it is that
Mm.
he's being layered with, and it's so effective.
Yeah. Also, props to the CGI special effects department for being able to make a believable looking ape that also
Yeah.
somehow kind of looks like a person and a
Yeah.
recognizable, because like I agree with Caesar and Andy Serkis. I don't know his name off the top of my head, but I can see it too with Koba. Like I can see the guy, like, cause he's only in a couple of movies that I've seen, but I recognize Toby Kebbell. Like I can see him in there. Like it's wild. While we're talking about how apes look, though, the only one I think kind of looks funky in this is Blue Eyes. I think he looks a little too humanized, if that's a thing,
I
because
think he looks a little gangly, which is supposed to like make you realize that he's like a teenager sort
I
of
guess, but like
situation.
it's in his face. He looks less like a chimp. Like they wanted to make him look more expressive, which I think is
I
fine.
agree.
But like when you,
I think
especially,
his face is like a little bit bigger and
yeah, like his
a
his
little more
eyes are bigger.
expressive.
His nose is not as like the mouth is not as pronounced. Like, especially when you see him standing next to his friend, whose name's Ash. It's like Ash just looks like a chimp, and Blue Eyes looks almost like a character you'd see from the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes. And I don't say that in a mean way. It's just I
Right.
feel like you could see more of a person underneath it, which I've always just thought was kind of interesting.
I thought it was really smart to have Blue Eyes like character arc in this one.
Yes, it's a great
Because
little arc.
yeah, like his and I think it's Alexander is the human kid. Alexander
Yes.
gets less screen time and less emphasis, but by allowing these two characters to have significant screen time in this movie, you're able to see how the current conflict impacts the growth and development of the next generation,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a really cool thing to include because a lot of the time movies get really caught up in what is happening in the moment. And this story that they're telling is a multi-generational story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, sure, Caesar in this version of the franchise is like spearheading most of it, but you get it from like the very beginning, and then we're gonna go much further based off what I've seen so far, know so far.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you need to be able to set the foundations of like this character is significant, or this is how this is impacting the people around them, and you can use children as one of the best ways to do that.
Absolutely agree, and I think they do. I think they do fairly well. I think there's like an argument maybe to be made that they could have done more parallels between Alexander and Blue Eyes, but I don't think it's
Sure.
necessary because the
Great.
humans. Well, I think in this movie, more so than the last one, I think definitely compared to the other Planet of the Apes movies that came before it, the humans have the most believable, as you said before, motivation,
Yeah.
and like most relatable motivation.
Mhm.
However, they still are in the back seat to like what the movie is about, what the main character is, and I appreciate that. Like there are no recurring human characters in any of those movies. That might be a mild spoiler for you, but I think
No.
I like that though. I think it works for these films, like because it's about Caesar and about his story. So I think all the human characters for the most part that we do see, they're interesting and they're cool, and I think they're acted very well. I think, like you said, we could have gotten maybe a little more from Alexander, maybe a little more from Dreyfus, potentially. But I think what we get
I
is
think
still
Travis
good.
played his role well. I think that I this is just something that I keep track of, like, in the back of my head. It's not something that I think necessarily has to be there to make a good movie, but the, usefulness or just, ability of female characters is something that I pay attention
Mm.
to. In the
Mm-hmm.
past one, the only female character was the girlfriend, and she did nothing, and that was kind of bothersome to me, I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, I don't blame you.
In Dawn, we have,
Ellie,
Ellie. And we also have
Cornelia.
Caesar's Cornelia, yeah. And she doesn't really do a lot.
Nope.
She's like a classic side character. She's just there to be a wife and have children. But Ellie's actually there as a medic. She has some things to say. She offers some emotional support. She's still very much a support character, but at least she's actually doing something.
Yeah, like I like her role in this. I like that
Yeah, I agree.
They kind of, in some ways it feels like Next Generation's Beverly Crusher. Like, we need the doctor. What if something happens? And oh, good thing we brought the doctor because someone got hurt. But I feel like in this movie, it happens naturally, even though they specifically call it out. She's like, you might need me. You don't know if someone gets hurt. But like when people get hurt, there's so much emphasis on like Rocket being the one that saves Carter after he shot his son, that you don't even remember that now the doctor gets like time to shine. Like it's I'm struggling to put words to it. It's like in a Justice League movie when they find a reason for Aquaman to do something in water. I don't think it feels like that when Ellie finally gets the chance to do something doctor related. Like Cornelia being sick doesn't feel convenient. It kind of, you make an argument it might be a little convenient, but it feels like a natural thing. Like she was pregnant, she was vulnerable, and it all kind of worked out in the end. Like I don't know. Like I like her role. I like that she gets to do things, and then they set her up doing enough medical things that by the time she's the reason they save Caesar, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not like they saved, oh, by the way, I've been a doctor for the last hour and a half. Now I get to do something. Like, it doesn't feel like that.
I agree. I think they do an incredibly good job, and I haven't pinpointed how they've done it yet, which is kind of frustrating for me. But they do an incredibly good job in these films of making everything feel both necessary and like almost unavoidable. Like
Inevitable.
The fact, yeah, inevitable maybe even is the word, because they set up that she's a doctor in the beginning, and she uses that as an excuse so that she can follow her husband. Like, she's not saying, like, sure, she's saying, I'm a doctor, I could be useful. But she's also, like, her primary motivation is, I want to go with you because I don't want to be left out of this. And honestly, we're probably as safe with you as we are anywhere else. So let's just go with you. And it's not like she's saying, like, it's not like she's shouting to the audience, there will be a need for a doctor later. Because with the movie that we're in, there's probably going to be a need for a doctor.
There's always going to be a need for a doctor, yeah. There's not like a scene that's like, let me make sure you all know CPR, so let's take a couple of minutes for me to teach you all CPR.
And like, and you're right, she has, I do think it's a touch convenient. Like, I don't know if I ever actually wrote it down, but I remember thinking like, oh, so his wife is sick, and so now she can be healed by the human, and that helps build trust in relationships. I think it works. I'm not going to complain about that. I think that's good. And then, of course, she's there when Caesar's been shot, and she's able to save his life. And I think that works actually really well. I have no complaints about that part, because you need somebody with that skill set in that situation. If you were just to be like, put some leaves on it, it'll be fine. Like, I wouldn't believe it, right?
I also like that she doesn't just do it in the back of a car. Like, she does need some equipment. Malcolm does have to go back to the compound. Like, I think, like you said, it's just everything feels like it does work. Everything seems to happen fairly naturally. The only things that I don't even know if I could say it's like not like a bad thing. This is very similar for me to Escape from Planet of the Apes. This is one of those movies where I'm like, this time it'll be different. This time Koba will see that they're not trying to hurt. He'll understand. Like, this time it'll work. Like, Koba's motivation, while believable, it steps over a line. You're like, 'cause at first it's like, it's very much Charles and Magneto, like, absolutely so believable. But then Koba starts killing the apes. He kills Ash. He locks up Maurice, and it's like, you just, like, what is it you want, dude? Because there's no glory in this. Like, like, what do you want to do? And it's like, it's more portrayed that he doesn't even know, which is fine. And like, it works. It's just, it goes from what I feel like to be much more of a concern and a believable apprehension to a believable fear and aggression and hatred to just straight up, I'll kill everybody because I wanna. And it's like, okay, well, that didn't come out of nowhere, but that did kind of come on a little strong, you know? Like, there's these horrible, painful, great villain moments where, like at the end battle, that one ape is under some rubble, and he lifts the rubble just to get the gun, and then drops the rubble on the ape again. It's like, who are you doing this for, man? Like, where is this coming from? Because all of this started because you cared about the apes, and it's clear that you don't give a shit about anybody. And I guess it just makes him a great villain in the end. But that's the one thing that I kind of take issue with.
I think I see the critique, and I don't necessarily think that it's wrong, but I think the script was going for a different interpretation of the character than what you came out with. Not necessarily that the script's intent is more correct than yours, because a lot of times scripts try to do something and they end up with something entirely different. Like, that's what writing is. But I think the idea is that Koba hates humans and is afraid of them. And because of that fear, will seek any power to guarantee his safety or control over the humans. It's not necessarily that he wants what's best for the apes, because if he wanted what's best for the apes, then he would be open to the idea that war is bad for the apes because apes will die. But he doesn't even care that if they go to war, apes will die. He wants to have absolute control and power over the humans. He wants them gone so that he can feel safe. And so when his safety is threatened, he will not take care of others in that situation. He'll take care of himself, which is why when apes started getting in the way of him being in charge, threatening his safety from his perspective, they were obstacles to be removed in the same way that humans were. Yeah.
I don't think you're necessarily wrong. That is probably more what they were going for. I do think, though, that him killing Ash just because Ash won't kill humans as brutally as he would, that's a little bit much. Because he used Ash as the kickoff for all that. Like, in the beginning, like, he was like, Rocket, they shot your son. You want to go attack them, right? You want to go. Like, and now you're killing this. I don't know. I just always thought that was a little much. But I think you're probably right, and I misinterpreted it a little bit. But and
it's not like I'm saying, because like this definitely is like you were comparing it to a Charles Magneto's situation, right? Like, this is, you know, one character who sees the future in peace, and one character who sees the future in like power, essentially. And the difference is here. I mean, I guess it depends on the iteration of Magneto you're working with, but the difference is here that Koba doesn't actually want the group to be safe. He wants himself to be safe.
Yeah, and the other part I think as well that makes it a little more difficult with the hindsight being 2020 and all the X-Men movies that exist with Magneto, Koba's actually wrong. Like, Magneto ends up being right like 75% of the time, but in this instance, Dreyfus isn't even like a villain. He's doing everything he can for his people, and he's being as like protective as he can. If the humans completed the dam and then went back down and like, hey guys, we're good, just don't go on any hikes, and we're fine. It's like, what reason do they have to go back up there? Like, everything's cool. Like, Malcolm's our ape ambassador. It's fine. Everything's cool. Don't even worry about it. Like, there was no human plot to go up there and screw with the apes after that. Like, Koba...
There was a lot of, like, calling for blood in the masses that were scared, but in terms of the leadership, they were like, we don't want a war either, we just need some power, and we have to fight to get it, that's what we're gonna have to do. But then Malcolm was like, hey, I got this, and he goes up, and he does the peaceful thing, and he and Caesar negotiate, and there's some rough patches, don't get me wrong, because Carver's a fool, but they make it all work okay, and then Kobo's over here not paying any attention to what's working, just doing whatever he thinks he needs to do,
tearing it all down.
Secure. Yeah, it's I think it's great. I think there was a potential maybe for it to be a more complex and interesting story where they both have some validity, but I think this is actually much better for what they were trying to do, in the sense that no matter how much some groups of people want peace, Other groups of people will want power for security. And that's the conflict that they were struggling with, not necessarily how to best solve the problem. It was that peace is really, really hard to accomplish because people are just going to go do what they want to do a lot of the time.
Yeah. They may explore that complexity in the next one. I don't know. We'll have to talk about that later. But yeah, I had something and I just lost it. But I was like agreeing with you as you were talking. Nuts. Where'd it go? I'll edit out the silence. What the heck was it? I'm
talking about
Koba and his hatred and Dreyfus and
I also thought it was very cool of Caesar to take responsibility for not seeing Koba's hatred and like he still trusts Koba and like he took responsibility for that in the film. I thought that was a cool move.
Indeed. Oh, I got it. Yeah, I both hate and love the movie for giving us the asshole comeuppance, but it's Koba doing it, so it's the beginning of the end. Like, we don't get to relish in Carver's death because it's going nowhere good. It's like, you cheeky bastards, you gave us what we wanted and we don't even get to enjoy it. Ugh. Like, it's
Well, I actually think that's great in terms of movie and storytelling because again, this franchise is about like the identity and language and violence and all of this being very closely connected. So with the idea that we're frustrated with this character, we want him removed from the board because he keeps causing problems, and then he's removed from the board, but by a character who's also causing problems. Like, that's a great way to highlight how complex the situation is.
He really is such a pain in the ass too, that guy. Like when they're talking about the simian flu around the fire, and she's like, well, I mean, they were experimenting on apes. It wasn't really their fault. And he's like, spare me the hippy dippy bullshit. It's like, what was hippy dippy about that? They didn't just walk out into the street one day and cough, and then you all got sick. Like, I know,
it's not like the apes had any malicious intent.
I know.
And how would you even imagine that apes have malicious intent?
Dude, like, I'm pretty sure, not that this is encourageable, but when the last pandemic happened, people didn't go hating on bats. They were more racist about it. But like, it's not, you don't go and blame the animal. You don't go kick a pig when you get swine flu. Like, and like, also it's like, because of the cool opening, which is a recreation of the credits from the last movie, it was public knowledge. That it came from apes that were experimented on. So I don't like, dude, you were just categorically an asshole. And there's probably some wonderful person like you who's gonna be like, well, it's because of his loss, and he's so angry, and he hasn't gone through the stages of grief. It's like, oh, fuck off. He's just an asshole.
I disagree. This character is designed to be a problem, and they don't spend any time with his background story or anything. So somebody could go write a fanfic where they explain away his traumas and they tell you why he is the way he is. But what you're presented with in the movie is this guy is angry at the world, and if we're being honest, he's scared. So he's going to do whatever he needs to do to feel safe. And that's, in this case, turns out to be listening to no one and violence. So nobody likes that.
Yeah. I do think it was kind of funny, though, that he was right about one thing. When Malcolm's like, hey, they let us go. It's not a big deal. He's like, maybe they let us go so they could follow us and find out where we are. And that's like exactly what Caesar did. It's like, well, okay, you get 1 point. You get half a cookie.
Well, the paranoid are often right, just not 90% of the time.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Oh, a couple other things that I really like about this movie. I like the progression of Caesar's talking, how it's slowly developing more and more. I like how it begins with him still doing sign language, and but like also talking, like it's like rough and grumbled, like almost like he doesn't know he's doing it. Like he doesn't know he's talking. Like it's slowly becoming less of an intention and more of a natural thing, but it's still not as articulate.
Well, and they use that with his son at the end of the movie
Yeah.
too, when Blue Eyes is like, you know, he sees that his dad's pretty much down for the count, and he's like, I can help you. And then he, like, in order to help him, he starts taking the role of Caesar, which is all what we kind of expect from him anyway. And he starts talking to his dad. He's like, look, I can do it too. I can start taking this leadership position, which is, again, great in the way that they use language and, like, identity and all this other stuff. Caesar is literally the voice for his people. And as his son starts to, like, take that on, it's a family business, and he's there, and he's helping his dad, and it's happening in the house where he learned from humans.
I know. Oh, I love that they go back to the house. I love that they go back to the house.
The way that they use the window symbol to communicate.
They see Caesar, who has survived, and they see him through their icon that they put on everything. Like, so good. It's so good. These movies are great. I love these movies.
It's fantastic. It's amazing.
Such wonderful movies. What's another thing that I really like so ridiculously much? Oh, so these movies, as we've seen, they are consistent with opening up with a hunt as homage to the first Planet of the Apes. This one's my favorite example of it. Great opening sequence with the bear and Koba and Blue Eyes getting his distinctive visual feature for the people that can't keep up with anything.
That's me.
Oh, is that you? You couldn't tell. You couldn't tell with his weirdly uncanny face and how he's always next to Caesar. You couldn't tell. Fair enough. Also, the first time I saw this movie, and we heard Maurice talk for the first time, chills. That was terrifying. Run. Like, it's so deep and guttural and spooky. Like, it's almost, I think, spookier than the first time Caesar talks in the last one. Like, it's just wild. I don't know what else.
I love that Maurice is consistently there.
I do. Maurice really gets to shine.
Maurice would be a really easy character to say that was a part of the beginning of the character, but we no longer need enough to come into its own. But advisors are so important to leaders, and I feel like the person who has written Caesar for these movies understands that. Maybe even the person who wrote Caesar for the original series as well, because he always had an advisor. It ended up being a different person every time, I think, due to casting issues, and it was a human in those instances some of the time. But, like, you know, having your circle that you can talk to and trust and process information with is a part of leadership. And I think so often great leaders are portrayed as these enigmatic, unknowable people who just happen to know everything and have the perfect strategies without interacting with anyone, and they're closed off and separate from the world. And I don't really think that's how it works. I think every leader needs a backup, and
he's a great backup.
I love that Maurice is the one.
Rocket, unfortunately, gets very little to do in this movie, which is a bummer. It's cool that he's still here, but
he just kind of like voices support most of the time. Like,
he definitely gets more to do in the next one, which we'll talk about next week. But this one, Maurice is like, the moment where Koba does want to go, like, screw with Alexander and Maurice steps in between the two, I know that technically that moment is probably Koba just doesn't think it's worth it at that point. But I can't help but wonder, like, for most of that time I watched that moment, is Maurice intimidating to Koba? Is it because of his presence in Caesar's circle, or is it that Maurice may be able to fuck with him? Because, like, I don't technically know. Koba's definitely quicker to a fight. Maurice is huge, though. Yeah, I just wonder what the other ape's perspective of him is, because he's teaching the babies how to write.
Gentle often.
Yeah, he's sitting up in the tree talking to Caesar. He's reading books. Like, he's Maurice. But then he looks at Koba and raises his eyebrows. And he's like, "Don't you even dare, dude. You want to do this? No, you know you don't." So I don't know. I found that intriguing. because it's
Yeah.
that's what you'd expect if we still had him, Buck, to do, like in this movie.
Sure.
Like Buck would be the one to look down his nose at Koba and be like, you need to calm down.
Well, I think it's important, and maybe we don't get a lot of it yet with Maurice, but I think Maurice as this is weird to put in terms of like gender roles, but I feel like that might be the best way to communicate it. Maurice is the one that's looking after the maternal side of things. Like, he's asking about everyone's emotions.
Mm-hmm.
He's checking in to see how everyone's feeling. He talks about, like, even the first interaction we have with Maurice, where he's signing to Caesar in the cages, he talks about how humans don't like smart apes because, like, and the subtext is because it makes them uncomfortable, right? Like, he's communicating how to protect yourself based off how other people feel about you. So it's very, like, emotionally intelligent. And when Maurice cares strongly about something, it's usually by some version of protecting. He doesn't want people to have conflict or fight. He usually protects like the young ones. He's engaged in teaching the young ones. He's very much like active in the growth and development side of life. Not so much the rules or leadership part, but he's the how do we get things to grow in this environment perspective. And I think that is such a cool character to have in these movies because it could just be flash and violence and look at these apes with weapons attacking the humans with weapons.
Right. There's not a precedent for it in Planet of the Apes because so far the orangutans, if we're being honest, other than what Virgil in Battle for it, the orangutans have sucked. They've been either like misleading just the villains, or they've been the little weasel asshole in the Tim Burton one. So him being that many things and that many positive things, like, that's cool that they chose to do that. It's also funny that you mentioned that because he is played by a woman.
That is true, and I do know that, and I think that's why I went to that side of things. But really, as I was talking, I think it's more about the emotional intelligence than it is anything else.
Absolutely.
Which does not necessarily have like a gender
role.
No.
Yeah, it is just funny though that you point that out, and that he is in fact played by a woman.
There's a gentleness to the character, but also a strength. And like the fact that those two things coexist so well with him, and the fact that he is not thrown aside by the franchise is wonderful.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when he gets shot at the end of the movie, I was freaking out. I was like, don't you dare kill Maurice. Don't do it. Don't you dare do it, because I will riot. He's my favorite of these movies, for sure. And I'm more excited about this new orangutan in Kingdom than I am the new chimp, just because of how much I love Maurice, which is silly. That's like weird reverse racism, kind of like I'm specifically excited for this kind of ape for no reason, only because I like the other orangutan. I also I haven't looked up all the cast names, but I feel like it's going to end up being like the rebooted version of Dr. Zaius, so I'm kind of pumped to see if they do something. That's for 2 weeks from now. I shouldn't talk about it right now. I'm curious though. Even though
we're due for another Zaius, I think
we are. We've gotten nods to Cornelius and technically Zira, kind of, not really, somewhat, a little bit, not really, somewhat. I mean, like
we've had the excited scientist reappear, we've had the leader reappear, we've had the advisor reappear, but we've not had like the maybe good intentions at heart, but kind of corrupt leader yet. We haven't really had that.
I'm hoping that this is like a reverse of that, like, because it looks like in the trailers, we're just completely going off the rails now, that this orangutan has past knowledge that he is using to help encourage Noah, which is the opposite of what Dr. Zaius does. But it would be kind of cool if they take that and they just flip it on its head. But anyway, that's for 2 weeks from now. Stop it. You're getting me going down a rabbit hole. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Even though Koba is doing evil things, I am fully entertained and love how he tricks the humans into thinking he's dumb. That sequence...
Although I gotta be honest, I find it super sinister. I mean, I know that's kind of like...
It's
like
so
sinister.
So good. It's so good. And it's... I don't know why, it's relentlessly entertaining to watch him roll in and be like messing with them and blowing raspberries, and then just like a light switch just starts taking them out. Oh, it's so good. It's awful, but it's so good.
Well, I'm gonna say I'm getting a little tired of our human antagonists being the dumb ones. I totally understand why this happens, because it is often the characters that don't understand the larger stakes or don't take the time to understand things that cause problems. Like, that happens in the real world all the time. The person who doesn't listen to instructions often messes it up for everybody else. But I find it's a little repetitive that the character you're supposed to hate is always saying something like dumb, stupid monkey. They underestimate the intelligence of the apes. They assume that they have some sort of superiority to the apes. Like, that is the bad guy, or like the actual antagonist in these films almost every single time, and I'm getting a little tired of it.
I can understand that. I do think it's kind of hard though, because I mean, to be fair, in this movie, the main antagonist is an ape. They take the forefront.
Yeah, good point.
But I don't disagree. I like it when our characters all around are intelligent characters. I think it would have been kind of cool if Dreyfuss actually got to interact with them, and he never got the chance. That would have been more interesting. And
with either of them, really, would have been cool.
Yeah,
Koba or Caesar.
For sure. I also again, going back to this movie is always like, oh, this time it'll be different. Like, Malcolm and Koba don't really interact beyond them being in the same place while he and Caesar are doing things. And it would have been kind of interesting if they included interactions with humans and Koba that weren't negative. Just to either to hammer home that he is too far gone, nothing will change it, or to show being conflicted, like one human he won't kill, like the one person he won't hurt. Like, I think that would have been kind of interesting. Maybe that would have.
I don't know if they had time to develop.
I was going to say, I don't think there would have been
really
time. It might have taken it off the rails, but it would have been interesting. I don't lose any sleep with the fact that Koba kills Jacobs. Not an ounce, but there could have been some exploration of, I don't know, the kind of hate, the lack of hate, the conflicted hate.
Well, especially if we're talking about how, kind of back to earlier in our conversation, how Koba is looking for security for himself, not necessarily safety for a group of apes or people. It would be really interesting, because in that mindset, he would totally accept help from, or as he would see it, usefulness from a human that he felt he could control or trust. And that would have been really interesting to further highlight, like, essentially his hypocrisy, like his worldview or propaganda is that all humans are bad because they cannot be trusted, because they will hurt you when they have the opportunity to. And yet, if he were to find a human useful who either could not or would not want to harm him, and he interacted with that human regularly, he would either have to ignore that human or somehow find an excuse for them to be the exception to the rule he's created, and that would further point out how flawed his perspective is on things. So it could have been really interesting, but I don't think there was time.
Yeah, fair. I did neglect to mention as well, I was talking about how Koba killing Ash is what points out that he's not doing it for apes and is only doing it to hurt people. Forgetting to mention, he, in his mind, kills Caesar. Yeah, so I think there is a way you could twist that, and I don't think they do it in this. I think there is a way you can twist or portray it where he thinks that he has to take him out to save people, like what Brennan does in the first episode of Star Trek Discovery. It's very clear she's doing that to help people, or she thinks she is. That's not what Koba's doing in this instance. It clearly isn't. He's manipulating his son, he's lying to people, and he takes out Caesar. Like, it's just a power trip at this point. The other part is he burns their home down. Like, he goes way too far, I think, where it just makes him just
it's
a
honestly
villain.
A really heartbreaking moment, because that's the moment when you realize there was nothing you could really do for this character.
Yeah, He
Like,
was
Koba was
irredeemable.
gonna do whatever he was gonna do regardless. And like Caesar, like you watch Caesar realize it as he gets shot.
Yeah.
And it's terrible
Mhm.
because everything is good. And then this one ape is gonna bring it all down.
When I watched this recently with someone else, I convinced them that Caesar was in fact dead.
I figured he probably wasn't.
Well, of course, we knew he wasn't, but like these movies are so dark in general, it was believable that he was gone.
Well, and that is true. Like I will say, I actually had the thought that
Maybe they did it.
if this had been any other character, he would have just died.
Mhm.
In a series that has a surprising lack of plot armor, like things just happen and they're bad. Like at the end of this movie, it is war. There is
Yep.
no escaping it.
Yep.
Like that's how these movies tend to end. So the fact that Caesar survives a lot of stuff that he really shouldn't survive is noticeably plot armor in a movie that just doesn't have a lot of that.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's really a critique per se, but it did make me like it's something that kind of brought me a touch out of the movie when Caesar got shot because they want me to believe that Caesar has been assassinated. Or at the very least, they want me to believe that the characters believe that Caesar has been assassinated. And yet I'm sitting here as an audience member knowing full
Yeah.
well that Caesar's got more to do in this movie
Yeah.
and it's probably not done. Because honestly, if Caesar had died in that moment, it would have all fallen apart much faster. And it would still be essentially the same story at the end of the movie. The only difference is there'd be no hope for reconciliation or really even like survival at the end of it because Koba would have been in charge and he would have just led everybody to their destruction. So
Mhm.
Caesar, in order for there to be any kind of ending that could potentially lead to something else, Caesar still had to be around. That or Blue Eyes found out the truth somehow, but since they had set it up
Yeah.
so that Caesar was the only one that knew Koba shot him, he couldn't be dead.
Yeah. I guess okay. I guess that would be maybe arguably the most or the only piece of truly convenientness is that the
Mm,
only ape that finds Malcolm is Blue Eyes.
yeah.
But like whatever,
Yeah.
it was necessary. We needed it to happen.
It's fine. It works. It's a good moment where Blue Eyes is
It
like,
is.
I
It's
don't like
good.
what's happening, and you
Yeah.
are an option that's not this.
Hmm. Okay, this is what we'll probably end on, and I want your opinion on this.
Ah.
I have a theory.
Mhm.
The reason Koba is the way he is not just because of his mistreatment, but it is because he is a bonobo, and he is closer to humanity than any of the other apes, making him more of a monster because humanity is always the monster in these movies. And I
I didn't
know
realize that
I
bonobos are supposed to be closer to humans.
bonobos are technically closer than chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are always the closest, and then we realized that they thought that it was that bonobos were a subspecies of chimps, and they were called pygmy chimps. But there was like, actually, no, they're not. They are a separate species, and they are closer to us than chimpanzees are. So, and it's also ass backwards in real nature. Like bonobos are relentlessly peaceful compared to chimpanzees in nature. But I like thinking in these movies that Koba is quicker to betrayal and aggression and hatred because
Stereotype and
he is
hatred, yeah.
closer to humanity. There's nothing really that indicates that, and I know for sure he is not the only bonobo in that troop of apes. I know that, but I like to think that is a reason why they did that because there's really no other reason to do that. Actually, see, I thought when I watched Rise, they do that moment on the trolley where it's Caesar, Rocket, Maurice, and Buck, and I was like, oh, the big four. I thought Rocket was a bonobo as a way to just illustrate the four big ones, but that's not what they did. So there's no reason for Koba to just be a bonobo, except for maybe they wanted to have a little fun, and the closer you get to humanity, the worse things are. I don't know. I think that's kind of fun.
That is an interesting theory because, like, in this movie, arguably, humans are the best that they are, and any of the other movies. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because like you were saying, Dreyfus is not really a bad guy.
Yeah.
He's just trying to look out for his colony. Malcolm
Malcolm's
is the one
great.
that
He's a great guy.
Yeah, he initiates peace and he figures out a way to solve both the problems, and he's persistent in the face of failure. Ellie and Alexander just continue to be perfectly good people the entire movie.
They didn't make a pandemic that wiped out the world. They are asshole astronauts that wanted to leave humanity behind. They aren't mutated religious zealots that blow up the world. They're not Mark Wahlberg.
For the extermination of the apes is because they're terrified because they just showed up in force and they didn't even know that they were out there in the woods. So like it's a reaction of fear, not just straight. There's a thing I don't understand. Let's kill it. And it's a little bit that, but it's like
they don't fundamentally misunderstand how timelines work and feel the need to kill these 3 chimps right now to prevent something from happening 2,000 years in the future. Yeah, I mean these humans are pretty great. They aren't asshole pilots that help wiping out the world. Like, you could go on and on and on about how awful the humans are in these movies.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory about the bonobo Koba.
Now that does kind of change a little bit in the next movie because there's more conflict between apes and apes. But I like thinking that the one that kicked it off is the one that was just a genetic smidgen closer.
Well, it is fascinating because I don't really think this is an intentional tie-in to your theory, but when Caesar kills Koba, he says, "You are not ape."
I never even thought about that. Oh my god, it's perfect. It's perfect. Yes. My theory stands.
And like what he means is more metaphorically, like you are not a part of this community.
Yeah.
But we're also talking metaphorically here because bonobo's not human, but it's closer to human than chimp is.
Oh, so good. So good. Let's end on that my theory may be being right. Do we have anything else to add? We've kind of, when the movies are good, there's like less to talk about, and we're just kind of circling the wonderful points.
I thought it was pretty good. I guess like I was saying, my biggest complaint is, and complaint's too strong a word. My biggest note is that I did find it a touch predictable, but it was still really well done, and the performances sold you on all of the moments. So tis a whale, right?
Tis a whale. It is a whale. Tis a handsome whale for sure. But yeah, that's where we're at.